Hi, Grandma here, and we are reading The Iron Ring by Lloyd Alexander. Well, the battle's going to happen real soon. The title of this chapter is Sankula, Sankula. And if you recall, Adhikavi talked about Sankula. When they were talking about the rules of warfare, Adhikavi mentioned there is a time when people don't follow the rules of warfare, and it is called Sankula. It is where it's every man for himself. It's utter chaos. It's vicious fighting, a free-for-all, and as Adhikavi says, it's a bloodbath. Well, I'm afraid with this chapter entitled Sankula, Sankula, that we're going to see some difficult warfare. Now remember, we have Skanda and his brother Kiran, and they are both the brothers of Ashwara. Ashwara is the one who is fighting to be king, and he is fighting his kinsman Nahusha, who has seized the throne and tried to kill Ashwara, Skanda, and Kiran. Tamar has wanted to be a commander because he's a king and a warrior, but he has no field experience. So he is waiting for his troops to arrive from his kingdom, and he will be more of a lieutenant to Skanda or Kiran. Skanda, flushed and furious, was shouting for him. Tamar stepped out of the tent. He could not believe what he was hearing. He told Skanda it was not possible. Not possible, Skanda retorted. You think not? Yes, well, Nahusha's done it. No challenge, no warning. Ashwara just found out. All officers report to him. Kiran and other commanders were already there when Tamar, still disbelieving, hurried into the headquarters tent. The Kshatriyas were muttering angrily among themselves. Ashwara silenced them with a gesture. He motioned with his head toward a warrior, begrimed with sweat and dust, standing, arms folded and face tight set. A rider from the king of Chandragar, Ashwara said quickly to Tamar, King Rudra, first to support my cause, a strong warrior, my firm ally from the beginning. His army holds my left flank, close by the Rana. He turned to the message bearer. Speak further. I have spoken all I know, the rider said, and all that Rudra himself can tell you. A little before midday, Nahusha's warriors attacked us in force. They took us by surprise. No challenge had been given. Against honor and rules of war, how could Rudra have foreseen such a deed? They fell on us as if out of nowhere. Spearmen, bowmen, hurlers of chakras. We took heavy losses, many slain before Rudra could rally his people and strike back. But when he struck, the man added with grim satisfaction, he shattered them. They fled, leaving their dead behind. Rudra holds his position. One thing more, the warrior grinned. Rudra sends these words. Say this to Ashwara. If Nahusha thinks to defeat me, he must swallow me whole. If he tries to bite me, he will break his teeth. Rudra has done nobly, Ashwara said. Tell him we shall strive to match his courage. Ashwara ordered his commanders to reinforce all battle lines and stand ready to answer any action by Nahusha. Skanda and Kiran hurried to assemble their troops. Tamar held back a moment to ask Ashwara, how did Nahusha send warriors against Rudra without our knowing? We've watched his camp every day. There was no sign of movement. Even if his columns left by the rear gates, we'd see them on the march. One answer, Ashwara said. They did not march from Ranapura. They were already in position, lying in ambush long before now. Well, that's what I have guessed. Mary had been standing unnoticed in a corner of the pavilion. She stepped closer to Ashwara. I have another idea about it, too. Speak your mind, Ashwara said. By rule, women have no part in warriors' concerns. His face softened. Even so, no rule forbids me from hearing a gopi's thought. Nahusha never intended to wait to be challenged, Mira said. As Ashwara nodded, she went on, and you? Did you believe he would? Ashwara's golden eyes darkened. No, I suspected he would not wait, yet I could not bring myself to strike first and break my dharma. In my heart, I still hoped that he might redeem his own dharma and meet my terms. I had to allow him that chance. King Rudra has paid dearly for my hope. His warrior's blood is on my hands, as surely as if I myself had slain them. Now there is no turning back. I do what I must. At Bala's court, I vowed I would fight for justice, not revenge. The moment is upon me, but I question. Can I fight without rage, without pride in battle, without joy in victory? Can any man kill and keep his heart pure? If not, then is all slaughter alike? Good cause or bad, and the same death for all at the end? Once I believed that death is the warrior's final truth. Is it only his last illusion? Until I understand this, Ashwara continued, I will not raise my own hand in battle. I will take no part in mortal combat except against Nahusha himself. He and I, face to face, the path of my karma will cross his for one last time. Stay away, he said to Miri. A gopi's thoughts may be clearer than a Kshatriya's. You, king of Sundari, go to Skanda. Put yourself at his orders. Word of the treacherous attack on Rudra had blazed through the camp. Trumpet calls rang out along the lanes of tents. Warriors ran to assemble, still buckling leather breastplates. Field officers shouted for their companies to form ranks. Without waiting to be told, Hashkat had hitched Gayatriya and Jagati to Tamar's light four-wheeled chariot. At its high shield-like prow, the monkey had filled the weapons rack with Tamar's sword, bow, and a full quiver of arrows, and set long, slender lances within hand's reach. Even before Hashkat could rein up, Tamar vaulted over the side rails to gain his footing on the flat bed of planks that served as a fighting platform. He sighted Skanda's own chariot and motioned for Hashkat to catch up to it. Nahusha's warriors are in line of battle, Skanda called out as Hashkat drew alongside. His face was flushed. His blue-gray eyes danced and sparkled. He looked like a happy boy. Kiran's people are going to engage them. I'm in support. We'll have to go at them smartly. Too bad there's not much daylight left. Orders, he said when Tamar repeated Ashwara's command. I really don't have any for you. Later, perhaps. Meanwhile, you will want friend Hashkat to keep your chariot in a little better trim. With a wave of his hand, he sped off. It teetered on the fine edge of insult. Ashwara's army was in high spirits. They had won almost every engagement. Tamar had not been in as much as a skirmish. He had handed over the ruby to Adhikavi, risk of losing it in battle. He could as well have kept it. Ashwara had not given him a company. When Tamar questioned this, Ashwara, too busy to discuss it, urged patience. He wondered if the lion-eyed warrior was deliberately shielding him, and if Miri had anything to do with it. He did not face her with his suspicion. They saw little of each other. He awoke each dawn, armed quickly, tumbled out Hashkat, and rode to the warriors' assembly. He waited. Neither Kiran nor Skanda had need of him. He was fuming. Also, he was a little relieved. His shameful secret, fear. It was like some kind of small, pale worm hiding unnoticed until now. It had raised its head the first day that he had seen the dead and wounded carted off the field. The dead at least were quiet. He could turn his eyes away. Some of the wounded were very loud. Worse, they were still alive. The worm thrived and fattened, feeding on him. Tamar understood. Before it grew bigger, he would have to kill the worm. Remember, that worm is fear. It's not really a worm. He calculated how to do it. One morning, leaving Hashkat asleep, he rode Gayatria to the assembly. He knew Ashwara's battle plan was to hold Nahusha's troops in check with foot soldiers and chariots, while King Rudra swung his lines across the open side of the plain to cramp Nahusha's movement. Skanda's light cavalry harassed Nahusha's flank whenever and wherever least expected. That afternoon, when Skanda's horsemen took the field, Tamar galloped after them. They skirted the main body of clashing warriors and wheeling chariots, the knots of foot soldiers striking out with spears and heavy clubs. They veered toward the fortress. Skanda was heading behind Nahusha's battle lines, attacking the supply tents and stores of weapons. Except for the first moments when Tamar thought his heart would leap into his throat, it was marvelous. Everything was suddenly bright and sharp, sparkling clear. He was light-headed, swept up in a wave of wild freedom. He could do anything he wanted. Sword out, he slashed tent ropes, trampling any warriors trapped inside. Everyone was shouting enough to burst his lungs. Skanda's horsemen were torching the provisions, smashing the stacks of arms. Tamar jumped Gayatria over a flaming heap and pressed on. The worm was definitely dead. Nahusha's troops fought back, at best they could, but they were rear area foot soldiers, not Kshatriyas. Those are the official warriors. Skanda's riders cut most of them down with least expensive effort and wasted motion. The rest fled slowly, for it seemed the time had become sticky and sluggish, barely moving. A man stumbled and flopped awkwardly across Tamar's path, got to his knees and raised his hands. Tamar could have taken the soldier's head off in one easy, looping stroke. The man stared, open-mouthed. He was gray-faced with bad teeth and did not want to die. Tamar stared back. As once he had looked into the tiger's eyes and felt the fear and pain of a trapped animal, he felt his blade cutting flesh and bone of his own neck. He pondered this for a seemingly long while. He turned Gayatria aside. The man got up and went away. So, this is interesting. Tamar was feeling great, courageous, thrill of battle, but when it came time for him to actually kill a man in one-on-one combat, he couldn't do it. He somehow could feel what that man was feeling and knew what it would be like to have your head cut off. So he has, some might call him a special gift. He has the gift of empathy, feeling what other people feel. Skanda was whistling for the riders to withdraw. The raid had wrought satisfactory havoc. Tamar thought it had lasted all afternoon, but it only lasted a few minutes. The sun was still high when Tamar, trailing the horsemen, galloped to Ashwara's lines. After sundown, Ashwara's field officers gathered in one of the pavilions. Tamar joined them. Kiran and Skanda were there amid a crowd of cavalrymen, laughing and tossing rough jokes back and forth. Skanda caught sight of him. "Why, here's the king of Sundari," he grinned at Tamar. "Don't think I didn't see you tagging along with us against orders." Skanda winked. "Never mind. I know you're keen to be in the thick of it. I like that in an officer. Oh, by the way, did you kill your man?" "Yes, of course." Skanda clapped him on the shoulder. Good fellow, good fellow." Tamar left the tent and did not go back. What's Tamar feeling? It's time for you to turn on your empathy. He's feeling guilty for lying to Skanda. He didn't kill the man, but he told Skanda he did. Tamar left the tent and did not go back. Why didn't he go back? Because he didn't want to participate in the joy of killing people? Because he didn't want to face Skanda and admit that he told a lie? Because he didn't want to lie more? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out later. They were killing the horses. For a moment, Tamar thought he was having a nightmare. He came full awake. Horses were shrieking in agony at the far edge of the camp. He flung on whatever garments lay at hand, snatched his sword, plunged out of the tent, the sky as pink as dawn. It took him another instant to understand. It was still night. Flames billowed from the pavilions. A fist of hot wind struck him in the face. He turned back. Miri and Adhikavi were on their feet. Hashkat, blade in hand, started off to hitch up Gayatria and Jagati. Let be, Tamar ordered. Miri, Adhikavi, take the horses and chariot. Get Rajaswami away. Ride into the woods. Stay there. Rajaswami rubbed his bleary eyes. What's the commotion? Good heavens, don't they realize people are trying to sleep? Tamar shook him. Go with Miri, we're attacked. Oh, I shouldn't think so, Rajaswami yawned. It can't be morning. Tamar hauled up the acharya and sent him tumbling into Adhikavi's arms. How will I find you? Miri called. I don't know. Hashkat with me. He ran from the tent, the monkey humping along beside him. Rajaswami, fussing and fretting like a child, was demanding his umbrella. Nahusha's horsemen, brandishing torches, were galloping through the camp. Behind them, spearmen and sword fighters. When Tamar finally grasped that Nahusha had done the unthinkable and launched a night attack, he also realized it was even worse. Not a sudden raid, a quick and savage frenzy. Nahusha was throwing most of his forces against them all along the line. Tamar headed toward Ashwara's pavilion. The camp had turned rosy red and orange, bright as day, from the fires. The little worm of fear stirred. It was still alive. It had only been sleeping. Tamar shuddered so violently he could scarcely grip his blade. Ashwara's warriors were grappling hand to hand with their attackers. There were no ranks, no formations, only swarms of figures that broke apart and clashed together again. Someone began shouting, Sankula! Sankula! The cry spread, one voice, then another. The whole camp seemed to heave like a single convulsing body. Sankula! Roaring, cursing, warriors flung aside broken weapons or ripped at opponents' faces with jagged ends of shattered blades, clawing, kicking, gouging. It was Sankula. Tamar ran blindly on, Hashkat at his heels. He lunged through a thicket of flailing arms and legs, struggling to reach Ashwara's tent. Free from the press of warriors, he sped across a patch of empty ground, lost his footing in a slick of mud, and pitched headlong. When he realized it was not mud, he promptly threw up. It was blood, and continued doing so until his stomach turned inside out. Hashkat crouched beside him. A royal sight you are, King Sundari. The monkey grinned all over his face. We'll get Adhikavi so to spout some heroic praises for you. They both began laughing like a pair of fools. A yellow-bearded Kshatriya ran past Kiran. Tamar scrambled to catch up with him. Where's Ashwara? Kiran had to squint a minute before recognizing him. In the field. He gestured toward Ranapura. He's ordered a counterattack. Tamar looked at him dumbly. Are you deaf or stupid? Kieran snapped. Nahusha's got nearly all his troops here. Who's left? A rear guard with no support. We strike them now. Ashwara thinks we could even take the fortress, so do I. Kieran ran on, beckoning to Hashkat. Tamar headed from the blazing camp toward the plain. The Sankula still raged. Nahusha's troops showed no sign of breaking off their attack. There were no orderly formations, no commands given, only shapeless clumps of men killing each other. From one moment to the next, Tamar could not even be certain which direction he was going. He flung himself into a thicket of struggling warriors. Pulling Hashkat along, he fought clear, only to find himself caught up in a stream of carts and supply wagons. The rear area cooks and quartermasters fleeing for their lives into the fringe of woods. To keep from being borne away by this tide, Tamar wrestled his way free. All around him, the ground was littered with discarded pieces of gear and clothing cast aside, in panic, forlorn, and ownerless. Hashkat, panting, dropped to one knee. Someone, it might have been Kieran, was shouting for the warriors to disengage and regroup in the field. Chariots had begun rolling out of the devastated camp, with some foot soldiers running beside them. Hoisting the monkey to his feet, Tamar was about to follow. He stopped abruptly. He stared more closely at one of the chariots. Miri was driving. Adhikavi beside her. Rajaswami, a glazed look in his eyes, was sitting at the rear of the platform, holding his umbrella over his head. Tamar was furious. He ran to the chariot. I told you to keep away. Are you out of your mind? What are you doing here? Looking for you. Miri hauled on her reins. Get in. You should have stayed in the forest. It's full of troops. Darshan? Tamar cried. He's here at last. No, Bala, he broke his word. He's joined Nahusha. The next chapter is called See the Trees Turn Gold. And remember what that means. It means that someone is going to die. Bala's army, they're spreading through the woods. Miri hurried on at Tamar sprang over the railing and moving this way fast. What's it cost to buy a king? Adhikavi put in. Nahusha must have sweetened his offer enough to make Bala change his mind. Hashkat had vaulted onto the platform. Miri threw the reins to Tamar, who sent the chariot rolling into the field. Rajaswami blinked and brightened. Is that you, dear boy? The Acharya called out in a small voice. I'm so glad to see you. But good heavens, you look dreadful. Whatever have you been doing? Are you taking us home now? Adhikavi glanced at Tamar. He's got no idea what's happening. He's somewhere else. A blessing for him. Tamar tightened his grip on the reins. Gayatriya and Jagati plunged over the rutted ground. The chariot lurched and nearly overturned. Rajaswami sat smiling calmly. Tamar urged more speed from the streaming horses. I'll find Ashwara, he shouted to Miri over the rattle of the wheels. He doesn't know Bala's attacking. The sky had turned a delicate pink. Rags of smoke drifted over the plain. Tamar thought first that the flames were streaking from the camp, then realized it was morning. Ahead, he could make out lines of racing spearmen. He had no idea whose people they were. Chariots sped crazily among the ranks. Tamar drove faster, hoping for a glimpse of Ashwara. The sun was up. The sky was a deep blue. For the first time, he could see bodies sprawled on the fields. The gates of Ranapura had flung open. Chariots poured out of the fortress. Nahusha's reserves were greater than anyone had calculated. The din had become ear-splitting. Tamar feared his head would burst from the endless yelling and screaming, war cries, roars of rage and pain. There, Miri seized his arm. There he is. Tamar turned where she pointed. Ashwara was on foot, with a half a dozen of his Kshatriyas about him. Some of Nahusha's warriors had set upon him. Ashwara, however, had not drawn his sword. Tamar, in dismay, remembered the Lion Eye had sworn to fight only Nahusha. With a shout of fury, Tamar sent the horses galloping into the knot of struggling Kshatriyas. Nahusha's soldiers scattered, the Kshatriyas in pursuit. Before Tamar could halt the chariot, Ashwara strode alongside and swung himself over the railing. "Go there!" Ashwara gestured toward a rocky knoll. When Tamar blurted that Bala had broken his vow and was attacking in strength, the tall man only nodded curtly. "The camp will be overrun by now." Ashwara's face was as grim as his face. "Rudra's lines are adrift too." "We disengage then," Tamar said. "No," Ashwara said between clenched teeth. "Too late for that. We still have some chance. Withdraw, we have none at all. Leave me by the knoll. Find my brothers and bring them to me." As Tamar hurried to obey, one of Nahusha's chariots wheeled to head straight for Tamar's car. The warrior, sword raised, was leaning over the rails. Tamar flung his reins to Hashkat, snatched his blade from the weapon rack. Miri seized one of the lances. She braced to fend off the onrushing chariot. At the last moment, Hashkat veered. The attacking car raked Tamar's vehicle along its length, breaking one of its shafts, shearing away the railing, then galloped on. The shock set Tamar back on his heels. The chariot shuddered to a halt. A wheel had shattered. The disabled car listed sharply to one side, its axle furrowing the ground. Gayatriya and Jagati, the horses, sank to their haunches. "Unhitch!" Tamar threw aside his blade. With Hashkat and Miri, he ran to free the horses from the tangled harness. He did not notice until he heard Adhikavi call out. He turned to see Rajaswami, jolted into sudden awareness, staring open-mouthed at the scene around him. Another moment, and the Acharya jumped to his feet, scrambled from the chariot, and went off at a determined trot, indignantly brandishing his umbrella. "A Brahmana commands you," he burst out in his sternest voice. Cease and desist immediately, all of you. Disobey at your soul's peril." Tamar started after him. The Acharya was hobbling resolutely into the fray. Taken aback at the sight of him and his umbrella, a few of the fighters faltered. Then the press of warriors swirled around the old man. Tamar, with a cry of anguish, tried to force his way through. Rajaswami had vanished in the crowd. Tamar had only a glimpse of the white umbrella before that too disappeared. Miri and Ashwara had come to join him. Tamar had no idea where Hashkat was. A handful of Nahusha's warriors raced across their path. The officer, sighting Tamar, broke astride, brandishing a bloody sword, made straight for him. Then the officer halted and stared, only now realizing he had come face to face with Ashwara. Even as Tamar sought to grapple with him, in one powerful sweep of his arm, he threw Tamar to the ground. "Ashwara, to me!" The Kshatriya swung his blade. Tamar staggered to his feet. Ashwara stood, motionless, his gaze fixed on his attacker. It was Adhikavi who sprang forward. Tamar had never seen him move so quickly. Suddenly, the Kshatriya's blade was in the Suta's hand. The man's arm wrenched behind him, legs kicking from under him. Adhikavi's boot was on his chest and sword pointed at his throat. "Stand away!" Ashwara's voice rooted Adhikavi to the spot. "Do as I order you, Suta. Put down that sword. Weapons are forbidden to you." Adhikavi, bewildered, threw aside the blade and peered, uncomprehending, at Ashwara, who had come to stand, arms folded, looking down at that Kshatriya. Rasha, so it is you, Ashwara said. The warrior bared his teeth. His face was bloody and smoke blackened. He sat up. Cold lights flickered in his eyes. So it is. Rasha blew a short hissing breath. Strike then, Ashwara. You threw a coin to a beggar once. Ashwara raised outstretched hands. For the sake of it, I vowed to spare your life. Go. I remember no beggar, I remember no coin, Rasha said. You vowed to spare my life? I made no vow to spare yours. It was quick, faster than Tamar's eyes could follow. Ashwara had started to run away. Rasha was on his feet. Tamar barely saw the flash of the knife that Rasha seized from his belt. In that instant, he plunged it to the hilt in Ashwara's breast, ripped it free, and made to stab again. Ashwara put out a hand as if to steady himself, then sank to one knee. Tamar sprang at Rasha. Adhikavi had already leaped ahead, roaring with fury. The Sutta gripped Rasha in his burly arms and heaved him off his feet. Rasha's men were running to him. Adhikavi lifted the struggling Kshatriya above his head. With all his strength, he flung Rasha into the midst of the oncoming attackers. The warriors staggered back. Rasha lay motionless, crumpled on the ground. Adhikavi picked up the sword. Whirling it around his head, he started toward them. At the sight of the Sutta and his whistling blade, they turned and fled. Tamar and Miri had taken Ashwara between them and were carrying him to the shelter of the mound. Adhikavi dropped the sword, waved them aside, picked up the silent form in his arms. Just behind the rocks, he set Ashwara at length on the ground. Miri cradled the tawny head in her arms while Tamar undid the leather breastplate. Get him off the field, Tamar said, still disbelieving what he'd seen. Find a chariot. Adhikavi had torn open Ashwara's shirt front. He glanced at Tamar. No use trying to move him. Let him rest. He has his death on him. He is right. Ashwara raised his head. Leave me to it. He turned his eyes to Adhikavi. Sutta, you did what was forbidden to you, and would do so again, Adhikavi said. Does it matter at the end? Ashwara smiled. I think not. He put out a hand to Tamar. Go on your journey. I follow my own. Miri, where is that gopi? Here. Miri bent toward him. Are you in pain? No, it comes easily enough. Ashwara's lion eyes widened. He looked around at the bare rocks. His face was suddenly shining. The trees, he said in a voice hushed with wonder. See the trees turn gold? All the leaves, the branches, how beautiful they are. Yes, they are very beautiful, Miri said. Ashwara did not speak again. He died soon after. I dreamed of golden trees, Tamar said in a torn whisper, omen of death. But it was his, not mine. Drums had begun a frantic pounding. Trumpet calls rang over the plain. Warriors were shouting. Tamar sprang to his feet. Rage burned away his grief. Red mist blurred his eyes. He did not hear Miri cry out to him as he ran past the knoll. A troop of Nahusha's horsemen galloped past, bellowing at the top of their voices. Tamar heard no sound. He snatched up the sword Adhikavi had thrown aside. He raced to them eagerly as if something extremely interesting to tell them and began striking blindly. Arm upraised, one of the riders leaned from the saddle. The last thing Tamar saw was a warrior's iron mace sweeping down on him. Now, an iron mace is usually a very big weight, and it's on a chain, and it's, I think, and you circle it and you hit. or it's a very big weight on like a hatchet. Which is it? Wonder if it's in the glossary in the back. Nope. I guess you'll have to look it up. Okay, that's all for now. It sounds very grim. I'm very concerned about our heroes. Bye-bye.